This is a chronicle of our summer at the lake in 2010. Summer always starts when we return to the cabin on Middle Island in Lake of the Woods in Canada. We wait for the ice to melt off the lake before we venture north to what is usually our second spring. Spring in Bloomington starts in March, but in northwest Ontario it is usually the first week in May before the ice leaves and buds start to come out. There was an early ice out in the spring of 2010, and the lake was clear by the last couple weeks in April. We left a bit earlier as a result, and arrived in Kenora May 6th. We never believed the amount of stuff we pack into our van to go north for the summer, but have not been able to determine how to reduce the load. Hence we had our usual collection of food, books, and tools, which you can see piled on the dock, waiting for our boat to be delivered. We store our boat with K-Sports in Kenora, and they deliver it for us to a convenient boat ramp, in this case the docks at the rec center. The pictures show the boat being launched. In the final one, I am heading out under the bridge, pointing for the Devil's Gap Marina, where we park our car while on the island. Anne will jump in the car and drive it to the marina, and after gassing up, we will head out to camp. Opening is a lot of work. Everything has been stored for the long cold winter and needs to be brought out. In addition, all water systems for toilet, heating, and so forth require some startup attention. We can get the cabin basically functioning in a busy couple of hours, but it is days before we are fully open. One of the first things we always do is put up the Canadian flag. If the flag is up, we are in camp. It had been a dry spring to this point, so the lake was quite low. There's a lot of beach, and it looked like there was a bathtub ring around all the islands. Our new compost bins had done their stuff over the winter. You can see a lot of compost ready for our spring planting. This picture of our garden was taken May 9th. It's unusual to have this much greenery at such an early date. Some buds have opened and most have made a good start. Many perennials have started to come up. Many years ago I used to walk to a point on the island where you could see over Scotty to the lake on the other side. We think we have found that spot along one of Mike Riley's trails, but the trees have grown up, so seeing over Scotty is no longer possible. We thought if we got there early enough in the spring, we could see through before the leaves came out. We were too late when this picture was taken May 13th, but I am optimistically pointing the way with my walking stick. We had no major building projects on the docket for 2010. In Bloomington, I had cut out all the parts for 2 large planter boxes. It was straightforward to assemble them in the shop, and after staining they took their place in the garden. The dry conditions had lowered the water level in the beaver marsh back of the flat, and it was very easy to dig up part of their dam for very rich soil for the boxes. We planted them with tomatoes and carrots. It proved to be our most successful summer at growing tomatoes. The small white table we had in our dining room was proving to be too small. Dave Hill and I had milled a number of rough planks from the big red pine that blew down on the cabin several years ago. We had brought up a new Makita planer, so I constructed the larger bookcase you see from boards we had both milled and planed. It's quite simple in construction, but as you can see it fits with our decor and has provided badly needed additional space for books, etc. We purchased a dissecting microscope, convinced that we could learn a lot about things smaller than our normal eyesight would notice. We are not disappointed. The second picture shows a small bishop's cap flower on the rim of a Canadian penny. We found that being able to see flowers, stems, and things magnified opened a whole new world to us. In particular, I set about to learn more about lichens. The third picture shows my collection of lichens spread out around the microscope. When viewed under the microscope, Lichens are fascinating, although hard to identify. By May 30th, the garden was well along, much ahead of last year. We have planted perennials that bloom at different times, so that we have something to bloom all summer long. In previous years, by the end of May, I've been able to catch walleyes off the dock. Not so this year. So on June 5th, I went out to Slate. Fishing in 30 feet of water, I caught this nice 3-pound walleye. We tried a new recipe called Gunflint Walleye. It looks delicious, and it was. One of the attractions of the spot of land Dad picked for A. Rene was the good collection of red pines it contains. A couple of these lean out over the lake a bit, and one of these started to die a few years ago. Terry Lenny asked if we wanted him to take it down on the ice in the winter, but we wanted to leave it for the various life forms that make use of dead trees. Last summer, only one branch had any life, and this year it was completely dead. A strong east wind, which we hardly feel at all, took it down into the lake. It was quite a job, winching it up on shore a bit at a time and cutting it into fireplace-sized blocks. This was complicated by the fact that the coil in my chainsaw would heat up after a couple of cuts and quit functioning until it cooled again. The pictures show the process of cutting it up. I might add that hauling it up to the woodyard chopping area was a bit of a task as well. Maybe I should have let Terry handle it. The second half of June we always go up to Woodlily Flat and look to see if the lilies are blooming. Things were a little advanced this year, and by June 13th, when this was taken, they were in full bloom. It's hard to spot the stalks and leaves without the flowers, so when the blooms come, it's like the whole flat comes alive. One event that made the summer of 2010 much different than previous ones occurred starting about the middle of June. Emily and Kevin were married at Brooms Island, Maryland. That's a car trip of 1,500 or so miles. They gave us more than a year's warning. In fact, I think Emily has been planning this event since she was 3. We spent close to 3 days on the road, both going and coming back. These pictures show that we did indeed go through downtown Chicago, but it was not rush hour, so it went smoothly. Washington, D.C. is on the horizon as we near our motel, which was located in Prince Frederick, Maryland. In keeping with current trends, the wedding was quite an affair. You can see that it was outdoors, with Christina as maid of honor and old Uncle Dave as one of the readers. The Hostler family was there, and many of the Gehrmans' friends. Anne took several hundred pictures of the rehearsal and wedding. Others covered the dinner and dance, so Emily has a good record of the event. All in all, it was a good time for old friends to reconnect and wish the newlyweds all the best for their journey together. We started back for the lake the following Sunday, June 20th. We took the route through Michigan and its upper peninsula. The Mackinac Bridge is always quite a sight, and no exception this time. We pay a bit more now for hotels or motels and find it makes the trip easier. The final night on the road was at our favorite motel in Orr, Minnesota, on Pelican Lake. When we returned to the cabin, we found that there had been good rain, so that the garden was in good shape. The peonies had bloomed profusely while we were gone, but there were still many left. What the picture shows is evidence that a bear had come through while we were gone. He turned over rocks and tore apart some ant-bearing wood, but stayed away from the garden and the buildings. The end of June through the last of August is the time when the cabins neighboring A. Rene are occupied. It is indeed the people time of summer. Sister Lois was in camp for most of July and into August. Rich came when he could get away. Rich loves to fish, and I would say he had good luck during both his stays at A. Rene this summer. His fish finder / GPS has extended his range. He took me to Alley Island Slough one day in July, and we caught walleyes in 10 feet of water in the weeds. That is usually confined to much earlier in the year, so go figure. A. Rene welcomed a number of guests. Caroline and Tim Armstrong were out one Sunday morning to view the garden. Lois, with the help of Jan Hill, entertained a number of women from surrounding camps. We dubbed the group the Island Girls. They, of course, had a tour of the garden. Alan and Judy Johansson drove up from Fort Francis to celebrate our joint 70th birthdays. Caroline did reservations and the serving. What year would be complete without a visit of Andrew and Bonita to tune the piano? They came rather late this year, but as usual, left the piano in excellent shape. We also participated in 2 traditional lake parties. Dave and Jan Hill host one for which Dave cooks something in his wood oven. Mike and Jan Riley host what is called the MISA, the Middle Island Sailing Association. Our contribution to these is a bucket of flowers cut by Ann from the garden. Dave is the designated social animal. The 2 groups are mostly different people. I actually walked the island paths, the only guest to walk any distance to the MISA. Just so you don't think that all I did was go to parties, here is a picture of the new spice rack / cabinet I constructed out of milled and scrap lumber. I think it makes Ann's cooking easier. The second picture shows a high-class magazine rack for the Gehrman outhouse made by Riley Brisman. Since it's dedicated to Christina, it is only fitting that some of the reading material be on analytic philosophy. Towards the end of July, Lois rode with Jan and Dave Hill back to the Twin Cities for a week. Dave and Jan had parked their boat in their slip at the marina. Of course, we had one of the heaviest rains of the season. The covers on these Lund boats that we have will keep you dry, but not prevent water from building up in the boat. Enough water in a boat with a heavy motor in the back will go down. Ann and I went to town to bail. Unfortunately, Dave had the key which would allow us to activate the electric baler, so we used the hand pump. Most of the water was out in 15 or 20 minutes. The boat was not sinking, but another storm might have done it. The picture was taken on July 23rd. Our closest neighbors on the island are the Brismans. We have known them for most of our married lives. They were in camp for July and a good part of August this year. Over the years, Riley has become quite a connoisseur of fine wines. He always brings a bottle to share with us, and this year was no exception. The bottle you see was what we shared to celebrate my 70th birthday. I might add, there was chocolate cake too. About the same time, our vegetable garden started to produce. You can see beans, carrots, and a tomato. I think it's safe to say we had our best year ever at growing and harvesting vegetables. Whoops! Another big rain and the hills are still away, so it's back to town and another baling job. Dave H. has vowed never again, and will let someone give them a ride to town in the future. The ground around camp could not absorb the more than 5 inches of rain we had in a few days. Several new, quote, lakes formed. The first one we dubbed Lake A. Renee, causing a lot of indignation among our friends and relatives who wanted it named after them. The second picture shows Woodyard River. We had a few very soggy days, but we certainly did not have to water the garden then. The next series of pictures will show the results of one of our major efforts of the summer. The island was last logged more than 100 years ago. The forest has of course come back, but not the same as it was. The locals call what has evolved the bush. This picture shows a typical example. There are a lot of trees, but now a mixture of pines, spruce, balsam, poplar, birch, and ash, along with the occasional bur oak. However, as you can see in this picture, there is a lot of bush. Hazelnut, osier dogwood, mountain maple, and downy airwood, and many low shrubs. The bush has thickened over the years, and we really could not see the lake very well, and we felt cut off from the rest of A. Renee. We decided to clear some brush and take down a few trees. The clearing involved using the big clippers, small clippers, Swede saw, pole saw, chainsaw, weed whip, rake, and the mower. We did quite a bit of thinning of the many balsams and removed the lower branches on lots of trees. One of the problems was what to do with all the cut brush. Ann clipped a lot of the dead stuff into pieces that fit in our stoves, and we burned it. I hauled many garden carts full of branches to the beaver marsh where we hope it rots. All in all, it was quite a few days of work, but as you can see, we now know that we live on a lake. About the second week in August, our newlyweds showed up for a week's stay along with their lab, George. They drove the 1,500 miles each way straight through, but they're young, so Rich and Kevin did a lot of fishing and clearing. Emily and her mom cooked, swam, and enjoyed being together. It is amazing the pull of A. Renee on those who spend time there. Em and Kev are ready to come back for a longer stay next year. Although there was only one day when the temperature actually hit 90 degrees, there were lots of days in the 80s with some high humidities. The 10 inches of rain that fell in July brought the lake level right up there, requiring the opening of the dam at Kenora. That kept the water temperature quite pleasant, warm enough to swim, but refreshing enough to cool on a hot day. You can see that I took good advantage, and so did Ma and Pa Gehrman. Lois left to go back and prepare for work on August 18th. One always takes a last look as we pull out. Life back home is very, very different. Not too long after we built the cabin back in 1973, we purchased a good bed. Our bedroom is small, so that we got a 3/4 size and managed to sleep comfortably on it for many years. I think it's safe to say that as one gets a bit older, you need more space to get comfortable. Finding space for what amounts to an additional sleeping area in a small cabin is a bit of a challenge. Our solution involved 2 new beds. One was a 3/4 size, which replaced the aging one in the bedroom. We pulled the chest out into the dining room and put the new bed back against the wall. As you can see, it creates a very inviting space. The second bed was an ordinary twin, which we placed in the living room where we formerly had a couch. It works reasonably well. The couch moved to Lois's front porch. All in all, we are pleased with our new arrangement and are sleeping better. Anne loves to garden and is constantly working to make ours better. In August, she determined that it was time to do some serious work. Parts of it were beginning to look too much like the bush surrounding it. She did a lot of pruning and moving of plants and bushes. It now looks more like a garden. We shredded a couple huge piles of branches from our clearing project and mulched the whole thing. When the edges are freshly trimmed, as in the pictures, it looks sharp indeed, and we feel it will be healthier overall. We had planned to stay until mid-October, but my back pain was such that we thought it best to head back more than a month early and get things checked out. When I was young, we always fit in one last fishing trip before washing the boats and putting them up the last day or so before leaving. We no longer leave the boats until the last day, but I always work in a last fishing trip. The fish you see before and after were caught on the George and in the bay. So we took our time closing camp. For a number of years we have left the motor on the Little Lund. It's bolted to the boat and would be hard to get off. So this year we decided, in deference to my back, to leave the motor on the Misty also. We got a chain in town and locked it to the boat. We decided to leave the fisherman at the beach and cover it with a tarp. That should protect it a bit if it stays on. All wood that was chopped was stacked in the woodshed or under tarps outside. The boathouse is indicative of a closed-up camp. On September 7th, we locked up and headed to town with our final boatload. We stayed at the inn that night. What you see is the boat just before I took it to the rec center dock for pickup by K Sports. Summer 2010 at the lake came to an end.